Hi, Mako. It's good to see you today.
It's great to be here with you. It turns out to be uh, kind of a regular thing for us, and it really helps to frame my thinking about culture care. So we're grateful for our
Oh, I'm
conversation.
really glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Something that I've been thinking about is on your website, when you first pull up makotofujimura.com, it says Makoto
Yes.
Fujimura
Yes.
slow art.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could talk about that because that's not the word slow is not something that
Yeah.
gets talked about a lot in
Yeah.
a positive regard.
And I recently found out there is a book called Slow Art that came out in 2018 or something like that by a writer, art critic in California. So I'm looking forward to reading. I just ordered it. And then he talks about this movement of slow painting that he has been tracing and so forth. So I look forward to maybe he can come out and see my next Pepperdine exhibit and see and talk about it. I'm curious to see what he's observed. But he says exactly what you say, which is in the age of this instant gratification culture, artists are making works that does the opposite of fast, consumable, celebrity-driven art. And if you go to any art fairs, perhaps the only thing you see is that, flashy, what I call neon art, from the Greek word neos. And and I have spoken about another word for new, which is kainos, and we have spoken on here on this interview series that kairos time is a different set of time, and so I think there are artists who felt it was necessary to intentionally slow down and do things that are more manual rather than digital, analog, and show something that is more enduring perhaps than flashy nails art. So uh, I'm not surprised that there are, it seems like a movement of some sort, underground movement.
Yeah. And I venture to say that that connects with your deliberate choice of materials,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
not just the analog digital, but then participating in a tradition
Yeah.
of Nihonga and being at the vanguard of reinventing that tradition as well through your subject matter and imagery.
Yeah. And my next book um, is all about listening through looking and slowing down and then invoking Sen no Rikyu, the tea master of 16th century, and then the work of his disciples in 17th century Japanese under all these feudal powers competing to consolidate Japan. So many wars, civil wars, I suppose, and in that time, this one tea master, Sen no Rikyu, in Kyoto, started really a movement, a slow movement, slow art movement, of creating smaller tea house than what they had before then. Tea was a Chinese import that was to be part of a feast, to entertain, and now it became this invitation by a tea master to consider something that is deeper than creating a gathering, but it was a deeper conversation into a person's soul, what it means to be alive, and to pay attention to even small details of what you would observe in a tea house and the garden that you have to meander through to get to the tea house. And so I'm writing about that as an emblem of what we can do in our own making, is to slow down and create a slow liturgy, in a sense of what we present to first to ourselves, and perhaps ultimately to the world, but it's that process of journeying into it, to the being called into the sacred space, that interests me. And so I'm working on a book right now, but as you know, Nihonga materials, this traditional Japanese materials, which really harkens back to the Silk Road, of earth materials, pigments being used as a way to, color the paintings and other expressions, but ultimately, Japanese way of pulverizing the minerals in itself is a slow work, making paper and making brushes. There's this ecosystem of slow art that Japanese have cultivated over the years, generations really have cultivated. So that is a very interesting reality, as opposed to the reality of digitization and instant art that we have today. And seems to me that it's even more important because of that advancement in technology and now AI. It's important to know what somatic knowledge can bring to our enduring conversations that, again, goes beyond the naos or neon of flashy, something that will that we pay attention to only for that day, and then it disappears.
And a project that you and I have been working on with a team is the Liturgies for Uncertainty,
Yeah.
the Culture Care podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is an exercise in slow art.
Mm-hmm.
We've had one season that released in 2020.
Yes.
And we're just releasing a second season this Advent.
Yeah.
The trailer's out now, and the episode 1 comes out this Wednesday.
Yeah.
And as a team, we've talked about the importance of the silent seasons that we had between our first public release of season 1 and the release of this public season.
Yeah.
But we really had 5 or 6 seasons in between.
Yes.
That were just within the team.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could speak to your experience with when, as you're doing work, when you're sharing it publicly and when you're meditating on it privately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting how we look back on the last 5 years with this huge disruption, we think, of COVID. And yet, for many of us, I think it became time of beholding and slowing down and really digging deep into what we do as artists. And the podcast being, on hold, as it were, to behold what it is that exactly a team, is called to do, was really important, to be honest, and to not rush into, in the production mode. And the luxury of publishing anything today, whether it be Instagram post or a podcast, is, we think we are required by our audience to keep producing something, right? That it gets consumed. And if you're transactional, yes, that's true. But in our case, we had really no interest in creating something transactional or even something popular. But I think we were interested in creating something enduring. So the test of time, I would occasionally go back and re-listen to our first set of podcasts that we created. And 3 years later, it still sounded fresh. And I really take pride in that we were committed to that excellence and that it can still speak. My fellows program at Bucknell University started out by students, whether religious or not, it didn't matter. They would listen to podcasts with Susie Ibarra and respond creatively. That was their application to the fellows program. And I was reflecting with them about how important culture care is for their lives today. Now, many of them have graduated, but working in the world from Wall Street Journal to Tesla, they're really implementing what they learned into their workplace, and the work will continue. The other thing I reflected on, Julia, was I have been not doing, but I completed a series of liturgical paintings for my church, All Saints Princeton Church. And during the pandemic, there was nobody who could come, but we faithfully went every season for Advent, for Easter, for Lent, to change the panels as a silent witness in an empty church, knowing that nobody may see these. But it was really important to me to do that as a form of exercise in my commitment to liturgy and seasons of life. But to really understand that this is not about showing your work, or it's about being faithful. And you know this, and I know this, but many artists I don't think realize that what we do as artists is not dependent on the work being seen. It is, that's nice, and of course we want that, and we should work hard to do that. But really, at the end of the day, it's just simply being faithful to the vision that we've been given to exercise. And so, there's a sense in which the silent witness liturgy is at the heart of what we do as artists. So why paint the paintings that you see? And all these paintings I was not asked to paint them. There was something that I felt needed to be done, even just to ask myself deeper questions about materials and about what's going on in the world, and processing that and to turning them into prayer. So they're really something that I am doing regardless whether I have an exhibit or not. I am fortunate that I am able to showcase them, but when I do, I also realize that the paintings capture something, hopefully, that is beyond me, that the viewer can resonate with, and that in itself is a generative act, that the work will continue to speak without me, and that it has a voice of its own. And so when I look back on our podcast, I think there was this necessary pause, and as you know, there were silent seasons, where literally we created silence, and that's just as significant in anything that we can say.
And as we as we break that silence, that's also significant, right?
It is.
And as you work in relationship and dialogue with your paintings and things are revealed, there's that other sense of relationship and belonging. I think about the cycles of the paintings going up in the church, and that's a rootedness in place.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that has resonance, how
Yes.
that resonates.
Yes, and memories attached to remembering, not just when I painted them, but when I put them up with Addison LaCroix, who was my assistant back then. And we finished The Ordinary Time, green panels just like this one. And we put them up and we just sat down and we just wept. It was just like a moment where both of us have gone through darkness. But more than that, it was a sense of just gratitude that we can do this long-term work. It was 7 years ago. I can't believe it, but it's 7 years ago that I started this series, and set of so 4 panels each season. So there's a set of 16 panels. And I did more than that, and chose the ones that I wanted for All Saints. And when we installed them, there was just this sense of not just completion, but gratitude that we can, serve in this way, serve certainly the church, but serve the world. And again, it wasn't about people coming to see it. It wasn't like an exhibit. It was just being able to participate in creating beauty, providing a vista for people to maybe gain something from it, whether it be hope or some kind of signal of joy or delight. That's all you can ask for. And so I felt very enriched by it, and the project actually led to so many other projects, including these you see, which wouldn't have come out if I didn't spend time doing things just for the sake of serving. That it wasn't for transactional commercial reasons or any gallery, or it was to serve a community. Yeah.
So what I hear in all of that is slow art as a generative act, as a participation in culture care.
Yeah, very much that. And culture care as a term, people ask what is culture care, and all I can say is, well, it is to see culture as a garden to take care of, and ecosystem to steward, rather than a battleground that we fight over. But as artists, we're like in a system. We're like the bees that go from flower to flower, and unintentionally we're pollinating them, and we look for and long for beauty. So that's why we fly out there and find it. People think we sting, so we're dangerous, and we don't want to sting because we'll die if we do. But nevertheless, the society looks at us, but honeybees are absolutely indispensable for ecosystem. Without them, we won't have any fruiting, So, so we really don't ask, like, to justify ourselves, as people making art or writing poetry or doing podcasts for no reason other than to, say something that is meaningful and important to us, and hopefully to the listeners. And and so that is in itself culture care work, and it really is difficult to define because it's manifested in paintings and poetry and podcasts and teaching and whatever we do, and it's part of, I think, art that anybody can participate in, because viewing it, listening is part of that culture care, and to be able to respond in some way like the fellows did, whether they be engineers or finance majors, to say, hey, I resonated with this and I'm going to create this. And if that's happening in all the places that we inhabit as artists, then the world will be so much better place, filled with people who are filled with gratitude, first of all, people who are looking to create the future rather than just critiquing the past or the present, and we can collectively, if we come together under perhaps this culture care banner, we can begin to see that slowing down really is important for our souls and us physically, probably, but also that it creates this galvanizing force for communities to gather. And in order for us to gather, we have to slow down anyways, right? To and we, if we are present in any place, that takes sacrifice for us to commit to that. Not to use it as an instrument to gain whatever we are trying to gain, power and wealth or whatever, but rather give ourselves away for that moment. We should be used to this because Thanksgiving and Christmas is a time when we give ourselves away to our families and so forth. But again, that's always also tainted today by so many acrimonious realities that we live under, and the reality of the world weighs up on us. So in a sense, what we're doing is trying to model this new kind of a community, hopefully where we can begin to see something that breaks open this reality of divisiveness and just how we have lost community, how we have lost family, that we belong to each other through beauty, and that we can give ourselves to that.
Yeah. When you mentioned the honeybees, I thought about a place that you took the fellows, which is the Community of Jesus on Cape Cod.
Oh, right.
And they have those beautiful mosaics, and they are a Benedictine religious community.
Yes.
And one of the values of the Benedictines is to remain settled in a place. And the symbol of that is the beehive.
Yes.
And I just, as I reflect on that, and when I first encountered it, I thought, I could never do that. I would always have to be going hither and thither, to and then things change and you find yourself remaining in a place, right? And that steadfastness that can come from that, and the different way you can perceive things as a result of that. And that as a generative act of culture care. So wherever you are the bee in your life, there is potential for culture care.
And there's so many kinds of bees too. I have this little box outside of the studio of mason bees. When I started writing this new book, for some reason I started writing about mason bees because they're solitary bees, and they make these mud holes that they plug up this tube, and they're the first in the spring to come out, and they pollinate really a lot of plants that we don't even realize they're there. And so everybody can participate in that, right? In some ways, not maybe literally we can be beekeepers of that sense, but yeah, when we went to Cape Cod and we saw the integration of community with worship and farm life, and also this sense of providing retreat and rest for people, we felt that, right, as a group, and we felt welcomed. That creativity and imagination, there's a publishing firm there, really mattered to this group. And yeah, there's a sense in which culture care and the slowness of life and the rhythm of nature really came together in that place.
Well, thank you for reflecting on these concepts with me today. And to all that listen, may you go forth in acts of slow art and generativity.
Yeah. And
Thank
also
you.
the podcast is
podcast this Wednesday.
This Wednesday is the release, right? So yeah.
Yes.
We'll put a link on here. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, Julia. Good to see you.